Welcome, everybody, to Kettlebell Corner. I'm Jeremiah Whalen with my co-host, Roger Parks. And today we have a special guest, Kelly Manzone, on with us. Kelly has a genuine love for movement, which is evident in her modalities and training principles. With an emphasis on skill development, strength, and longevity, she has a well-rounded approach that we can appreciate. You can check out her services and events on her website, kellymanzone.com, and her Instagram, where she shares valuable content and all kinds of swinging and twirling of clubs and bells and all these things at kettlebells 88. Kells Bells 88. I'll post it up there. Don't worry, we'll get it out. She also has an online class platform called Revive and Thrive Strength, where she focuses on strength and longevity with kettlebells, sandbags, and body weight. Kelly, welcome. And I got through that, but was there anything you need to add to that for us?
No, that's great. Thank you for the intro.
Okay, great. So, summed it up pretty good. All right. All right. Well, I'll just jump right in. I just want to, we're a kettlebell based training show, and I just wanted to see what your current relationships with kettlebells are and what does your training with them look like now?
Sure. Well, my hands touch a kettlebell daily. They are by far one of my favorite fitness tools that I fell in love with in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And it's been a staple in my training for myself and with my clientele. My personal relationship with it and what I really enjoy is the versatility and then the dexterity and communication with the palm of the hand. It's a different tool and modality than your typical barbell or dumbbell. And there's something for me that when I have that connection with a kettlebell, I just feel like really enriched and entranced into my movement practice. Like it's well-rounded. I feel emotionally connected to my movement. I feel, physically present, and I get all the benefits of the strength training along with it. So again, I use it every day.
I love it. Do you have like a specific style or that you focus on, like hardstyle sport or like a mashup or?
I always say that, like, it's funny because every podcast that I go on, typically, people want obviously to describe yourself. And I find it very challenging for me to describe myself, to put myself into a box, because I've been a lifelong athlete who has done a number of sports. And then in my professional career of almost 20 years, various modalities. And with kettlebell, I would say I'm a hybrid of hardstyle, and I did a short kind of time period with competing in kettlebell sport. So there's an element of kettlebell sport that I really enjoy. And then I guess you could say just kind of more of like a free flow where taking the tool through various ranges of motion that would be similar to some of like the circular training, or a little bit of flow style, but mainly hard style is my baseline with kettlebells.
I want to talk about this idea of the kettlebell or any tool really as an extension of you. It's kind of a neat idea. Talk about that. What does that mean? Is that just physical, or does that go a bit deeper?
It definitely goes deeper for me. I have ADHD and anxiety, which I've been dealing with my whole life. And I do a lot better with I do my best thinking when I'm in motion. And I found, especially when I came across kettlebells in like 2005, I think it was 2006, I was like, oh my gosh, I found a tool that goes way deeper than just like your typical training. Because when I first started off in the industry, almost 19 years ago now, was at a corporate facility, New York Sports Club here in Westport. So it was very kind of like your traditional mainstream fitness. And I never quite fit into that mold because I was a big history buff and I really enjoyed thinking outside the box. And I didn't think that everything had to be so fixed. And when I came across a kettlebell, I was like, wow, like there's a way to move weight when the technique is appropriate. So you could take, the sensation of when you first like have your technique for your kettlebell swing or your kettlebell snatch or your kettlebell clean. You're like, wow, like that was seamless. So you can make heavy light. And that's when I was like, wow, I'm really drawn to like the emotional, like physical connection with the mapping of the brain with the palm and with a bell, because of the weight distribution and the handle. I feel like it forces you to be more present and then I had experience with other training modalities, and that it was a carryover and segue into circular training, that same sensation of making heavy light or having it become this seamless extension. So you progress from when you're developing phase of the learning process, and then you are in a skill-based modality where there's technique is involved. And when you're in that process, you just have to be, for me, I just feel like it's a complete package of being connected to movement, thinking just outside the box of not only training and exercise. It's like also with crossing the midline of the body. So when you start doing that with circular training and tying it in with the kettlebell work, because they both kind of complement another well, I just feel like you become more resilient in your practice, both physically, mentally, and I really enjoy it.
What about things psychologically, emotionally, patience, things like that? Have you learned anything else through this extension?
I found that I am stubborn because when I am trying to learn a new skill, I have a tendency to kind of park myself in my home training space here. And I will literally play the same song sometimes. Like it could be a Pink Floyd song, because those are long songs that I kind of zen out to. For 45 minutes to an hour, I will literally, it'll like, okay, repeat. And I just lose all track of time and space. And I really focus on honing in on the skill and the technique. And there's a lot of, their frustrations a part of the process. And then patience and resilience is a part of the process. And I feel like going through that and allowing yourself to really try to learn the modality and dive into like the little nuances that aren't always like seen. That's why I really like most of my online clients are fellow fitness professionals, and I'm always encouraging them to film their practice and watch it back. Because if you kind of film in regular speed, you could slow it down, or you could film in slow motion. And then there's so much to pick up on. And I just find that that's like a really useful, beneficial way to get more out of your exercise, your training, and whatnot.
Yeah, well, kettlebells will teach you a few things about yourself. That's for sure.
Yeah, they're humbling, right? Especially like
for sure.
And then as you get more experience, you could play with adding load, more weight. You could play with volume, tempo. So there's a lot of like, you have the tree base, getting those roots, and then you have the foundation to really build and branch off of and explore. I don't think it's a practice that ever gets boring. I feel like it's something that is like, for those of us that really enjoy kettlebell training, it's just something that's with you, that resonates, and you just feel connected to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without a doubt. I can agree to almost all that. Well, probably all of it, I don't know. I don't really listen to Pink Floyd over and over, but I've been there.
Well, it'll be something, but I just like, I'll fixate on that one. If the beat or the song changes, sometimes it'll throw off my process, and I'm just like, all right. And I'm like, my poor neighbors, because I live in a condo. I'm like, if the window is wide open, I'm like, and for the 10th time,
They're like, we know what's going on. We know this. We love this song. I am actually curious a little bit more about circular training. And, you mentioned that kettlebells were the gateway. Can you tell me a little bit about like what circular training is and how that has evolved for you personally?
Yeah, sure. So when I was trying to dive deeper into kettlebell training back in the mid 2000s, I was, like I mentioned earlier, I was at New York Sports Club, and I wanted to get certified in kettlebells. They offered like a certification within the company, and I went and looked at it, and it was more like fitness kettlebells, and it didn't resonate with me. And I was like, so I decided not to do that certification. And during that time, Anthony DeLugio of what was Art of Strength, where a lot of my vintage tools back here are from that time period, he had a franchise, Punched Gyms, and there was one in Norwalk. So I contacted them because I really wanted to dive in a little bit more and find out about Art of Strength. And they said, Anthony's in Rhode Island, and there's a certification coming up. So I went to that certification, and what I really enjoyed was it was based on physical culture. So before we even cleaned a kettlebell, we would clean a dumbbell, like one of the vintage dumbbells that I used in my video this morning, and a barbell first before we touched a kettlebell. And it was a fantastic kind of system of regressions and progressions. And a lot of the old time strong man lifts were involved in the whole package of what he was doing. And I, at that time, and I have them over in my kitchen, which is not your typical kitchen, but don't mind the mess. But here's some of my kettlebells and sandbags right there in my kitchen next to the garbage. But underneath there is the Balava short maces that he had created in 2000. They came out a little bit later after the cert, but in like 2009. So that was my first introduction within his system. He also had Indian clubs and those Balava short maces. And after I got certified through Anthony, I started writing for his website, doing product reviews and articles. And I was even featured during my pregnancy with like my 2 Balavas. And then after I had Leonardo, I just kind of took some time off I had to recover, obviously. And a couple of years later, unfortunately, I got very ill with colitis after food poisoning. Not fun, from a salad. The year that spinach and cantaloupe were in the news for listeria and salmonella, well, I was hospitalized and on antibiotics for 6 months, and my whole health took a dive. And I was like emaciated. And part of my recovery, because I was like, feeling fabulous on top of the world, and then something happened outside of my control with my health. Getting into circular training again was one of my ways of healing myself, both emotionally, physically, and mentally. So I revisited a lot of like what I had originally learned from Anthony. And during that time, I also, was a big fan of my mentor, Taras Polkovinsky, who is in Australia, because he's been putting out content for over 10 years on YouTube, with the various circular training, Indian clubs, Gata, Mace, the Jory that I have here that I just had handmade, meals, and other tools. And that I'd also done the Rick Brown certification. I can't remember how many years back that was. And I was one of the first women that competed in Mace training competitions. And I went to the Arnold's Classic, and that was pretty cool, getting on stage in front of everybody. And I was like, oh my God, I had just done like a 10-minute kettlebell sports set. And then they're like, oh, you're going on the main Rogue stage. I'm like, I am? And then all of a sudden there's like thousands of people staring, and you're like, you see yourself on stage and the screens are like you up on the screen. I'm like, oh God, I'm dying. I don't know what to do. But I just put myself out there. And from there, everything else kind of continued to evolve, and media with Instagram, my page started to build. And after a while, people were contacting me to do workshops. And so I turned it down the first 4 times. And my husband's like, you're crazy. If trainers, your colleagues are contacting you, why don't you start teaching? And so then that's when my circular training workshop started. So it's been this evolution.
Nice. So it's the circular training sort of like that's going to be using you'll have to excuse my ignorance, but like the clubs and the clubs and maces and then the gatas and the jories and stuff like that. That's pretty much
so
it.
Like within the meal and the Persian meals here in the jory are like my personal practice. So I don't teach anybody those skills. I'm still very much learning myself. The Indian clubs, which these are the pair that Paul turned for me as a gift. So I teach these, and then the mace, which I showed you earlier, this is the Gata. And I've been teaching those for, it's so funny with the pandemic. I keep like my brain immediately eliminates the last 2 years. So I think it's been like 5 years since I've been doing my own workshops. And it's been a blast. And it really, pairs nicely with kettlebell training, especially like I really got heavily into circular training when I was doing kettlebell sport because of all that high volume overhead. I was like, my body needed to like move. I needed the elbows to cross the midline. I needed that opening of that back swing, and it felt really good.
So this is actually a good opportunity to ask this next question, I think. Sure. What lessons have you learned from your other other circular training, other movement that you do that informs your kettlebell skills?
What I feel like I've personally learned is the importance of healthy hands and healthy feet. But like, I feel very emotionally connected to having a strong grip, because unfortunately, the women on both sides of my family have been absolutely crippled by arthritis. Like, my mom is getting her second knee replacement next month. She needs a hip replacement. My mom has one hand she can't even open. It's like it's a claw hand. And on the other side, I took care of my grandmother before she passed away, and her spine was crumbling. So strength was something that was really important to me in grip. And I found that the kettlebell was such an amazing way to feel connected to the hands, build grip strength. And I wanted more women especially to think about their training. And if your grip is strong, your heart is strong, and then all your other lifts. And if your hands, your hips, and your feet are strong and healthy, pretty much everything in between is going to be too. And it's about like longevity, and I like to challenge myself. So the kettlebell training led me to, exploring the circular training tools. And then you all, like we do with the kettlebell, you start somewhere. So I remember the first time I swung a 7-pound mace, and I was like, oh my God, and then the process continues. And now I could swing 30 pounds or 35 comfortably. And so I like the evolution of these practices, because it's something that takes time and patience, and it's skill-based, like we talked about earlier. And now I can't remember what your original question was.
You're getting there. What I'm curious about is, I'll give you a personal example. Yeah. When I've gone and I've done any work with clubs or maces, I have found that my experience with the kettlebells has crossed over a bit. Understanding, for example, the concept of, okay, I feel this in my elbow. It's because I'm moving something with my arm. Let me see, is there a link between the arm and the body that I'm missing? How can I move this with my body rather than my arm? I'm wondering how many of these lessons you've learned through your other tools of circular training you've actually been able to take with you and improve your kettlebells. Are there any aha moments that you've gotten, like, oh, actually, I can use this for my swing or my snatch?
So like when I was doing, I went into kettlebell sport doing double long cycle. So double bell. And with that high volume, I remember like my left side is my less dominant side. And I have a lot of hypermobility, excessive range of motion. That was great when I was a swimmer and a gymnast and a dancer in my youth. But as I got older, and there was a short period of time where I taught yoga, I kept sliding out my SI joint. So with that high volume of overhead kettlebell, I was like, I have to offset this, because then I start kind of getting like jacked up, like things just kind of don't feel good. And I have a tendency to fall into my joints as I fatigue if I'm constantly going up and overhead. And my left lockout, my lockout on my left wasn't strong. So when I was, particularly with mace training at that time, I was doing a lot of single arm 360s. And then I did inward 360 and outward 360s, because I feel like, a lot of times with circular training, the elbow is going inward. So I wanted to also kind of get it outward, really get my lat engaged, and work in teres major and teres minor, so that I could have a little bit of more stability in the lockout on my left side. And throughout the 7 competitions that I did, that I found that was like an immediate carryover with my mace work. And I was like, like now I feel that stability. And it took time, but it happened. And then even now with like my snatch work, so my left again is still like my less dominant side. But I feel like with all the midline crossing, I've been able to kind of connect better. Like, I just feel like, okay, even when I'm fatigued, I could kind of hold on and keep my technique and keep my form. Whereas I think if I wasn't doing a lot of midline crossing and kind of getting into various range, planes of motion, that's what I like about circular training is you get into the sagittal plane, that transverse turn through the shoulders, And I feel like it's such a great carryover into, because even after that, I started with deadlifts, pulling more. So I even with pulls, I felt a transfer because my grip was stronger, my lats were more connected. So yeah.
Let's make explicit. So what do you mean by midline crossing? I can assume you mean crossing the center of the body, but can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So I actually recently I have created a new course in collaboration with Original Strength. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They are located in North Carolina, and so their whole base is like the 5 resets: rocking, crawling, head movement, and diaphragmatic breathing. And crossing the midline of the body is mentioned a lot within like the OS format. So on, you also light up both hemispheres of the brain, which I really enjoy. And I think, just to keep our minds healthy, like our body, midline crossing and asynchronous patterns, we get that coordination, that dexterity, and we could keep our minds and our bodies youthful and resilient. So what the midline, it's kind of, I was thinking of it when I was writing the manual. So I've finished the manual, but and I was talking to Tim Anderson a while back, and I'm like, well, we hinge, we squat, we push, we pull, we do all this stuff, but we also like throw and swing. And circular training clubs were some of the first equipment that humans have ever created and have utilized. And then in India and Iran, some of these practices now are kind of a dying art form because now modern gyms have come in and the culture is shifting and changing. And I think in general of our mainstream fitness, we've got very like linear. And I just found that once I started crossing the midline of the body, I was getting resilient. And I've recently also created a program for local tennis athletes and golfers. I called it a Sturdy Athlete Program. And I can't tell you how many times like women, that I've met in town, they're like, oh, I reached back in my car to grab my purse and I tore my rotator cuff. And I'm like, duh. And I feel like, if we get the grip stronger and we start getting into that sagittal plane, that transverse plane, you're cast out onto the frontal plane, you build some resilience. And that midline crossing is, I think, one of the best ways that we can, balance out our movement practices. So yes, that's so the elbow inward and then outward.
Lower body too?
Lower body is definitely involved. Like, you could, so there's different styles of club swinging, even today, like I did the vintage squat, but with my vintage dumbbell, but you could do outward hearts into a vintage squat. That was very common during the Victorian era when the British had adapted Indian clubs and brought it back from India. And then it kind of took off on its own. And then you have the British style where they also add in some leg work. And I may not say this right, but in India, they have an Indian club swinging style, Karla Katai. I don't know why I always say that wrong, but that also involves some leg work. But even in your mace swinging, like it's a full body movement. That's why like you're really connected to your feet, to your legs, to your glutes, the trunk of the body. So, oftentimes people think it's just isolated to that upper body, but you're really integrating everything. And that's another carryover into your kettlebell training where, you're trying to have somebody really learn how to ground their feet in their kettlebell swing or, connect while they're going through a TGU or something. You got to feel everything.
That's awesome.
Yeah, totally. As far as like the mace or the clubs, or I know you say you have these joys for your personal practice. Let's just say, what do you recommend? Like the average strength, male or female? What should they start? Like, what's the baseline for somebody like that would want to incorporate that into some of their training? Where should they start with that stuff?
I think it's obviously like a personal thing. So, like I feel like everybody should, if there's a style of swinging that resonates with you, that like you're like, oh, I'm kind of curious about it, I think you should go and seek it out. That's why I feel like, there's a great way to kind of begin with just very basic Indian club patterns before you add the longer lever of the mace. So, for example, like this weekend, I'm running a mace workshop in New York City at Motive, and I'm bringing my Indian clubs so that if I have beginners that have never swung a mace, when both hands are on the mace in the gata and you're in your front rack position, you have to push up and out to cast on the frontal plane, and you're creating a transverse turn through the shoulders. But you have to kind of comprehend like what's, beginning to happen. So with Indian clubs, the Indian club parallels, there's a transverse turn through the shoulders, and here's like a cast. So here's a transverse turn with parallels in Indian clubs. Here's your mace. Here's your transverse turn. So there's ways to kind of correlate. And so most people could map out or just kind of get accustomed to circular training, having something extending, beyond your grip with the Indian clubs, and then progress to a longer lever, like I said, with a mace. And, I branched off from there into all the tools behind here. And these large jewelry are I think I'm probably the only woman in the world that is swinging these and that owns like a pair of this weight. This is challenging for me. They're 26 pounds a piece. They're 12 kg, and they come up to chest height. But that's
so you say that they're your pride and joy.
Well, okay. They're called jewelry. Yeah, I like that.
All right.
Well, you can use that to me because of my mentor, Paul, that I've collaborated with over the years. My friend, Tom Billage, he lives locally, and he found a local wood turner, and we both got turned a pair, and he's actually just returned from India. And so, yeah, that's something that I'm going to try to tame. But I feel like my kettlebell background and then the progressions that I've gone in my circular training have allowed me the ability to kind of build that base to even attempt something like this. You don't start off with that, and that's why I feel like the kettlebell training leads to so much more. Like, and the same thing with the circular training. You could start here and then you could evolve and continue on. And it's a nurturing process. I really enjoy it.
I've got a question about your strategy for learning new skills. You obviously have picked up a lot of things, and each of these modalities have some commonalities, but there are certainly differences. What's your general approach to learning something new?
For me, my general approach to learning something new is, like I mentioned earlier, like I'll kind of really plant myself in my training space. I don't like having a lot of distraction around me. So if I'm learning something new, I'll come home instead of being in a gym and distracted by like the environment around me. And I will, like, for example, meal training, right? So the grip is different. So with your Indian club, you have your ring finger right here at the base of the pommel, pinky resting on the pommel. This is your hammer grip, and that's your saber grip. With a meal, the grip is different, and the pinky goes underneath the pommel and the ring finger above the pommel. Now, as you go and progress to massive meals, you'll be holding up higher with a closed grip. But just that change from that little nuance of where the pinky is placed brought me down this like massive rabbit hole, and what I'll do is, like I said, I will literally play the same song and I'll just practice and I'll like have to breathe, walk around. Sometimes there's cursing, and I film a lot of my practices as I'm learning the skill. So I'll prop up my phone, I'll film, on profile, then I'll also turn sideways so that I could dissect all like the little nuances, because I'm very visual. So I have a visual memory. And so when I watch things back, I feel like I could hone in on like the stuff that I need to improve on. And that's typically how I'll learn something. I just visually watch it back, listen to the same music kind of, I have to get into like a flow state. I just kind of completely zen out. And that's sometimes where I lose track of like time and space. I don't know if that's the hyper focus of ADHD, but I just like will have like tunnel vision and I'm like, I'm going to work on this. Like the other day, I swung these two jori for over an hour and just persistently kept putting this one jori up on a chair because I had to put one big club on my shoulder, bend down, pull the other one over, get into the center of the mat and just keep going. And I'll just keep doing it. And I feel like, you know, because of the base of all the sports I've done and then the base of the training that I've done over the years, my body allows me that ability to kind of hone in on that skill for a while where I could work it. And then next day, not feel like I've been beaten to a pulp. You know, it's also just being sometimes like with an Indian club pattern, for example, like that's if I'm learning more complexity, I'll just walk by my Indian clubs, not think too much and just pick them up and try it, then walk away. So every time I pass my mat, I'll pick up my clubs, do a few reps. Because sometimes if you're learning like a new Indian club sequence, and it's challenging, you get so like caught up in it that you fuck up. You just, you know, so the best way to sometimes learn is to not think, just pick up and do.
Got it. Now you brought it up and I've been thinking about it since you mentioned it. What's the deal with the pinky? Why is it different in one grip versus the other with one tool?
So that's a good question. And I should know more about this, but with, because you have to hold the club lower. And so you want the with a meal, they're supposed to be close in to your body. So it's a lot harder to kind of have that grip here. And the pinky helps to stabilize the club. And so,
okay.
Yeah. So you're not supposed to be like 90 degrees here with a closed grip. You want a little bit of length and then the pinky adds that stability and it allows the club to lean in closer towards the body.
Gotcha, which you wouldn't need with an Indian club because they're not so big.
No, because that's a different technique. And then with the jori, though, you don't do that. Like when you have the closed grip with the pinky above the pummel.
Okay, well, thank you. Now I can sleep at night.
That'll be a first time for you then, Roger. Well, Kelly, you've worked a miracle here today.
I'm always getting lost thinking about something, these little details.
Yeah. It's funny because, like, you know, my mentor Paul is definitely a better source for like all the history information because I do sometimes get confused or just kind of mix up the wording. But yeah, it's pretty fantastic. Just the history of everything. I just enjoy it. I love it. Oh, I think my screen just froze.
Oh, I know you're good. I think Jeremiah's frozen.
Oh, he is.
Either that or he's really thinking hard.
That shows with the strung.
Oh, you're back now. Jeremiah?
We're back? Okay.
Yeah, you can stop. You
yes,
can
I'm
stop
here.
swearing. Yeah.
Well, we're all here and it's still the same. And it's all good. I had the most profound question ever, but I guess I'll save it for another time. So I have a question. I'm just fascinated by these different things. I'm pretty sure I'm doing one or all of these things wrong. I do work with some Indian clubs as a warm up for most of my kettlebell stuff, just enough to kind of, like you said, bring the awareness, get the body on. I find that it really heightens up like my grip and all those sorts of fun things. But my question is like, so with the kettlebell, you know, you can train power, you can train strength and some endurance. What are some of the real training benefits somebody can get from using these different implements, and what are like possibly some of the bigger limitations to them?
One of the limitations with circular training, which, you know, is actually, that's a great question because another reason how I got started teaching my own workshops is people would reach out to me because obviously over the past several years, the past decade, like Mace in Indian clubs have become really popular, but particularly Mace. People are like, oh man, like my elbow's all jacked up, like my elbow hurts and my triceps bothering me, or my wrist is, you know, feeling a little funky, like tendonitis. And I was like, oh wow, like they really need to work on their technique. And people would send me like a clip of their practice. Part of it would be that they just haven't learned and been taught yet how to properly swing, what the technique breakdown is. But another thing that continuously was occurring was I was like, oh my gosh, like this person, it should not be swinging a mace. Like they don't even have the prerequisite of having proper range of motion. And a lot of people get into circular training, especially mace and Indian club. Indian club, if you have a little bit of like limitations with your range of motion with your shoulder, or you're recovering from surgery, they're more adaptable than the longer lever and weight of a mace, especially if you're using a gata. So with a gata, this is bamboo. So all of the weight is in the mace head on this longer lever. So there's a lot more torque on the body. And then when the mace is in the backswing, there's a lot more, volume, it feels like, weight-wise, just because of the trajectory of the backswing. So range of motion, a prerequisite of having healthy shoulders, is really important to kind of have an assessment, in my personal opinion, before you go down the rabbit hole of incorporating mace training. I feel like, like we talked about throughout this podcast, circular training is a fantastic complement to kettlebell training. But you, like with somebody like working with, overhead press or a snatch, like if they don't have the range of motion and they're really compensating elsewhere, it's probably not best for them to be continuously going overhead. And the same thing applies with the mace training. Please remind me of the question. I keep doing this. I'm sorry.
That's all good. No, that was good. That was very helpful.
I just want to make sure that like I'm saying what I am.
Yeah,
on.
and I think I'm just out of curiosity. So, you're doing the circular training. What are we? Crossing the midline, and like I said, we can train strength and endurance and power with kettlebells and things of that nature. Are there any like specific or illicit training benefits that you're going to set out to achieve from training with those modalities?
Yeah. So like, for example, with the mace training, we'll use that. You could get incredible like rotational strength. You could really tap into your lats, build your core strength, because like I feel with how I teach people is like on that initial cast is kind of like the off switch. So you allow the mace to become an extension of your body. Then when the mace head is right about here, you have to turn the body on, pull, and then you lengthen, your arms and you go into that brief moment, that rack. Everything lights up. And so it's like, I feel like there's the benefits of reflexive strength and reflexive control, because you're using a tool that is actually, moving around your body, and it's on a longer lever. And when you tap into reflexive strength and reflexive control, I feel like you become a better athlete, or you become more connected to your movement. And, you have that occur with, the process of the mace. Sorry, my puppy's coming over here. When you're the carryover into your kettlebell training, say you're in the middle of a workout, you get distracted, or you just have like an off rep with your snatch, that reflexive strength and control, like, okay, like I'm going to save my overhead position, even though that was a crappy rep. Like, I feel like it just makes you kind of more aware of your body positioning, and that immediate, like, now is the time to create tension. There's the time to not create tension. And obviously we learned that in certain portions of our kettlebell training experience. So the mace and the kettlebell have that kind of in common, of that reflexive strength, control, time for tension, time for not creating tension. And I feel like you also tap into that transverse turn through the shoulder, the bull horns. So the hands drop to the base of your neck and your elbows point directly up. So it's kind of this nice opening for that offsets, push pull press. And the benefits, like I said, for just grip and stronger lats, stronger shoulders, stronger core is phenomenal.
Well, you brought up this idea of compatibility, specifically with prerequisites, shoulders, things like that. Are there any modalities or skills, even within the kettlebell world, that you don't seem inherently compatible with? Is there anything that just isn't your skill, or you don't do well? And if there is something, what's your approach? Do you leave it alone, or do you attack it, and how do you do that?
Within kettlebell training, you're asking?
Kettlebells or other skills in general. I think what I'm interested in is, I don't think that we're all good at everything. And, there are certain things, like I am naturally better at pressing than Jeremiah is. Jeremiah's naturally better at ballistics than I am. Yeah. I think a lot of it is a body type thing, but I work to improve the one, he works to improve the other. Is there anything that you just don't really feel well suited to do? And what has your approach been to, to overcome any deficits or problems there?
That's a great question. So I have found, and this is going to go back to like my technique, but with kettlebell sport. So not hardstyle. Somebody like myself, with my mobility, I would sink in the rack position. So in kettlebell sport with double bells, you rack your weight on your hips versus hardstyle. And my tendency was I'd go like way back. I would just be like, because I could get away with it, right? And I would sink into my lumbar spine, and then I would jerk my bells up overhead. Instead of like fixating right here, I would, my lumbar would go back, and I'd have a little bit of that, anterior tilt. And then I had a tendency to jet my chin forward just because I had all that range of motion in my shoulders that I was trying to control. That was something that like I still want to get back into kettlebell sport. And I particularly like double bell long cycle more than a single bell in snatch. I don't know if it's because of being a Libra. I don't know, but I'm like, yeah, I like that balance. I'm like, those two bells feel comfy. I don't like having like one bell loaded on my hip. And I feel like that just gets me all kind of like, I don't know, I feel like off center. But I feel very comfortable with that double bell. And I would have to really like dissect my technique, because after a while, like of high volume like that, I just don't feel good. It's not that I'm injured, like nothing's like physically hurt. I just don't feel great. My recovery is not great. My body just kind of gets a little, because I do have genetically a little bit of arthritis in my T-spine. So typically people get it in their cervical lumbar first. Mine's genetic, it happens to be in my T-spine. So all that high volume, just doesn't feel great. But I want to do it again. I really want to compete in sport again, but I would have to approach it now, like from a completely different approach. Whereas my buddy, Yuri, who, I remember when my son was just born, he came here with this buddy and he's like, I'm going to start a kettlebell sport company. Can you help me, translate from Russian to English? And I'm like, sure. Then all of a sudden, years later, the company took off, American Kettlebell Alliance. And then, we're going to Arnold's a few times, and it was great. And I got on stage, but I really need to work on that sport technique of not collapsing into my mobility in long cycle. That was something that that's going to take a lot of work to break that habit, for sure.
Got it. So you're not just going to back away and say, hey, that's not really for me. I'm not good at that. You're going to keep working it anyway.
I'm going to work at it, but I'm going to work at it a bit smarter, because I just was like, helping my buddy out like with the competitions, and I just got into them like way too fast, like back to back to back. I would space it out. And right now, just like with what's happening with work in like creating the online content that I'm working on right now, and with my son and everything, it's like when you do sport, you have to really dedicate that time to that practice. And you have to be really smart about what you do on the other days of your movement. And I like to move often, and I like getting out of, I'm just not ready right now for like fixed training for a competition, but I want to definitely do it again in the future, for sure.
Very nice.
Yeah, I'm always interested in that kettlebell sport. It's very interesting.
Some really incredible athletes. Like I'll never forget. It's probably the best moment I've ever seen in sport personally. When it was a few years ago at the Arnold's, and one of the sport lifters was doing double long cycle with his body weight, and he lasted 10 minutes cleaning and jerking his own body weight.
Jeez.
It was incredible. And there he was, he's just like dying under these like 34 kg bells, and he just goes up for a rep, and you're like, oh my God. And he lasted the 10 minutes. And I was like, I'm like, that man right there is one strong human being, and just mentally strong. It was awesome. It was really cool to witness.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the cool things about kettlebells, and just like the mental and the physical strength that go into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for as far as like hardstyle or anything like that, have you ever, I like to ask this question for a few specific reasons, but have you ever done the hardstyle technique snatch test, the 5 minutes 100?
On my own, but not as a part of a certification.
Right.
Yeah.
How was your experience with that? What was that like as far as like your training, or do you have any like things you would share with somebody who is trying to attempt that?
When I did it, it was before I did sport. So my prep for it was just, isolating. Like I started off building the volume slow. So it'd be like 10, 10, 15, 15, 20, 20. And then I would volume up 50, 50. But in current times, I have not done that in a really long time, and primarily because like when I'm snatching now, it's just for like my personal practice without like training specifically for anything, because I'm really trying to hone in on these guys. So I take a skill at a time. Like I've made the mistake in the past of like really kind of trying to do a lot at once, and then you just end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot, and you don't get to that progression. So if somebody's prepping for the snatch test, I think they should also kind of like be aware of like what they're doing on their other days. Because if you're in the business, like, you and you're prepping for something like that, you also use your body for your job. So your day to day, you want to be able to show up for your clients. You want to feel good. You want to be able to get up and off the ground safely. And, so I've always been very conscious of the fact that I rely on my body to stay healthy and injury free, so that I could be a good representation for my clients and show up. And I realized that when I was doing all that high volume in sport, I was like doing too much, and I just didn't like the way that I felt. So if somebody's prepping for their snatch test, to be aware of like, what your week is like. I think sometimes, I don't know if maybe it's age, because now at 42, I'm mentally just a lot different than I was when I started off in the industry 20 years ago. I probably would have just pushed through everything. And now I just think of like the whole picture with everything. I feel like, what's my day like? What's my week like? What do I have going on with my son in my life around me? And then now like with snatching, I'm going back to 24 kg snatches, but I like work in the progressions of the load. So like in the past, when I've done higher volume of snatching, it depends. Like I would start with like a lower bell, and like sometimes like ladder up within like the training format, and then ladder back down. So I think it's personal to whatever, people are like specifically looking for.
I like that. There's some good stuff in there. I have a follow-up question as far as like, say, let's just take the mace, since we were talking about that earlier. And what's like a setup for that? Like, so like, should I do like 100 swings with the mace, or 100 360s, or what, like what's like a general like starting point or a place to go with that?
So this is why I have a hard time always kind of like fitting into the format of a program, because I am very much an intuitive person and an intuitive mover. And that even translates into like when I'm doing snatch volume. Like there's a time and place, obviously, to like work a program if there's like an end goal, like for competition or for a test. But in my day-to-day living in training, I'm just very much like intuitive. So I set like a goal or guesstimation of like what I want to be at. Because what I found with circular training is when people were telling me that they were going to do 50 swings, they would do maybe like 20 decent swings and 30 really shitty swings. And then they would run into like this elbow issue because they weren't really working the technique. And you also have to really progressively prep your triceps. So you have a long lever, hands dropping each rep to the base of the, neck in the backswing. And it's a lot as you progress in weight and in volume. And you have to, that's why there was a lot of mace swingers that ran into issues with having tendonitis, like tennis elbow from, not too much volume, too much weight, not spreading out their training. So I think I, for the most part, intuitively move. And with circular training, I'd rather see somebody do a timed practice when they're first learning, maybe, or like more intuitive. And as they start to get comfortable and their technique cleans up, then get a little bit more structured, because it's like that process. And that was hard, I think, for me to like let go, because I think in our industry, we're always like 3 sets, 10, 15, and movement's not always has to be so structured. And that's why I never really fit into a lot of like mainstream fitness modalities or practices, because I was like, well, like there's more than just that. There's a time and place for sure. But I think with a mace, I will now I'll be like, okay, I'm going to pick up my mace. I'm going to do 50 right, 50 left. But I've worked up to that. Or I'll go in 5 minutes nonstop or 10 minutes of just mace swinging. But I progressively build up that volume over time. So I think it's like personal to what resonates with that person. And if they are like a counter and they want that, start with something that's reasonable. Don't, think I got to do 50 swings right and left and have like half of them be like, bad technique, if that makes sense.
Totally. Makes tons of sense. I can dig it.
I got one more for you. I'm gonna try something a little different. We pick our guests because we think everyone has something unique to offer, something unique to teach us. And I've never asked anyone directly, what is it that you think you offer? What do you think it is that you can teach us that people need to hear that we may not be hearing from other people?
What I think about often when I see general public that I work with, or with trainers and colleagues that I cross paths with, professionals, I feel like sometimes we really get caught up on the numbers, the PR, it's got to be, this is regimented. I need to have that. And for the general public, I think sometimes they're like, okay, I'm showing up for that 1 hour. I'm going to just get that in, check, it's off. And they're not really connected. I think one of the missing links sometimes when it comes to either training or it's coming to working out and exercise is that real connection to the modality, to your body, to your state of mind, and getting more out of it than just, I'm going to fit in what's programmed for me. I'm going to just show up. It's something that is very innate. It's human nature. I want people to feel their practice, not just do it. And, I think we all have to start really thinking about what we do in this decade is going to set us up for the decade to come. So I don't look back or and say, oh, I want to be like I was then. I want to look like that person, because I'm not there. We all are, every day the clock is going and we're all going forward. None of us are going back. So I want to think about what I'm doing now and how it's going to set me up for the next decade. And that's where that intuitive mindset that I have comes from. And because like I've already pushed, I've been an athlete my whole life. I want to be doing this stuff like my mentor who's 72 and still at it. And it's such an inspiration to me because he's got stage 4 prostate cancer, and he shows up every day and he does his training with his kettlebells, with his circular training. And I feel like I want people to think of that too, on both ends, the general public and the fitness professional. Connect and think of the next decade. Because sometimes we're just like, I'm going to, just keep there. There's more to movement. There's more. It's rich.
That's some solid advice. I like that.
Explore the gray. I feel like it's like there's so much black, white, and it's like there's so much beauty in exploring the gray. And we all need to kind of just like open our mind. And what, like my training style, if it doesn't resonate with somebody else, that's great, groovy. You do your thing, I do my thing. I think we've gotten way too judgmental, way too dogmatic. And at the end of the day, we're really all for the purpose of we want to just Mooks, it's okay, boo-boo. Sorry.
Get a dogmatic.
It's my husband coming home. That's what she but at the end of the day, we all do this because we really enjoy it and we love it. And it gives back to us and we give it to others. And that's the stuff that I think is what it's really about.
Very nice. You got anything else, Jeremiah?
Not after that. I think that's a good place to end. Let's all end in the gray, and feeling the green. I love it. And there's so much. I mean, obviously, a million more questions came to my mind as you talk and gave us the answers. And I'm very grateful for you coming on. And let's remind people where they can find you or access your stuff. So what's the best place for people to reach out and connect with you on either training or just seeing your stuff?
Sure. So obviously I have my website, but I'm not very tech savvy, kellymanzone.com. That's kind of sitting there in the web sphere. But my email is Kelly at KMMoves. So all one word, Kelly at KMoves.com. And then obviously I'm very present on Instagram at kettlebells88. I started a TikTok, but I can't do it all. I don't know. It's up there. It's just kind of sitting there, Kelly Manzone. I'm like, I can't figure that out.
Just pick one and run.
I don't know. I feel like it's another interesting facet of like our industry and the technology of where we're at. Like we get all these pieces, and that's another reason why I just love the training aspect, because that's hey, bringing it, centering it. But this was awesome to be on, guys. Thank you for letting me just kind of ramble.
Of course, that's what we like. We're here to learn. So is everyone else watching. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you again for coming on. And I just want to remind everybody to be sure to check us out on all the social medias as well. At the Iron Revival on Instagram. At what's yours, Roger? Roger M. Parks. I don't know. You can find him.
Probably.
We're on there somewhere.
I forget. I have to check.
It's out there. More importantly, download the Bells app. It's free. It helps add some intuitiveness to your training. And Kelly, thanks again. And thanks for tuning in to Kettlebell Corner. And we'll talk to y'all next time. Stay strong.
Thanks, Kelly.
Bye, everyone.
All right.